Cotswolds is an area of the southwest Midlands of England covering 6 counties, predominantly Gloucestershire and Oxfordshire. It is designated an area of outstanding natural beauty. Not only when the summer sun is on it, but also in the winter months when the dusting of snow gives it a certain cool beauty. The area is dotted with some of the most picturesque towns and villages in the whole of the country. Many of them constructed with the warm, honey-coloured, beautiful Cotswold stone. In this film, we'll be having a quick look at some of these villages and a slightly longer look at 2 towns which I think in particular are worth looking into much more closely. In the Middle Ages, and right up until the time of the Industrial Revolution, the area was very wealthy, and the source of this wealth came from one commodity only, and that was sheep. The area was well known for sheep and wool, and many merchants made fortunes out of trade in these commodities. Most of the towns in the area have a sheep street, showing just how important the animal was to their well-being. In one instance, the entire town was named after its favourite animal. Some of this wealth was used to build magnificent churches in the area, and there are a number of towns which boast what are known as wool churches. Others put their money into magnificent houses and gardens. Sudeley Castle dates back to 1443 and has been owned by various kings and queens over the years and visited by many others. It later became the home and final resting place of Catherine Parr, the 6th and surviving wife of Henry VIII. Castle Combe is often named as the prettiest village in England, and it's always used by filmmakers looking for a quintessentially English village. It has a market cross and a 13th century church which houses a faceless clock, reputed to be one of the oldest working clocks in the country. Another candidate for the country's most beautiful village is Bybury. At least that's how William Morris described it, more of him later. Bybury has a group of 16th century weavers' cottages called Arlington Row. Henry Ford, on a visit to the town, was so impressed with this icon of England, as he thought it, that he tried to buy the entire row to ship back to Michigan. Fortunately, he was unsuccessful, and a picture of the row of cottages can be seen on the inside cover of a British passport. Broadway is known as the jewel of the Cotswolds and the show village of England because of its beauty and magnificence. There are buildings in a wide range of architectural styles, the earliest being Abbott's Grange, dating from 1320. Broadway Tower is a late 18th century folly, designed by Capability Brown, best known for his landscape gardening. It was completed after his death by the architect James Wyatt. At over 1,000 feet above sea level, it is said to command views over 16 counties. A few miles away, Burton-on-the-Water is known as the Venice of the Cotswolds because of the many bridges that cross the River Windrush that runs through the centre of the village. Among Burton's attractions, you will find a bird sanctuary, a motor museum, and a miniature village. Lower Slaughter gets its name from the Old English word meaning wetland or muddy place, pronounced slaughter. Situated away from a main road, it is quieter than many of the other villages because there is very little through traffic. It therefore presents a quieter, calmer, more timeless atmosphere. Copp's Hill Road in Lower Slaughter was once voted the most romantic street in Britain. I want to take a slightly longer look now at two of my favourite towns. One is Chipping Campden and the other is Stow-on-the-Wold. Stow sits on a hill 800 feet above sea level and is the highest town in the Cotswolds. It is at the junction of a number of main roads, including the Roman road the Fosse Way. It has been a market town since 1107, when Henry I gave it its first charter. And the author Daniel Defoe once noted that on one market day over 20,000 sheep were sold in this lovely market square. Today, the town attracts many visitors. Some are just on day trips, whilst others use the town as a base to explore many of the other towns in the surrounding areas. The English Civil War was fought over 9 years in a number of different phases. The final battle of the first phase in 1646 was fought in Stow-on-the-Wold. The Royalist army, led by Sir Jacob Astley, was defeated by the Parliamentarian forces. Astley is said to have surrendered by sitting on the market cross and saying to his captors, "Well, boy, you have done your work. Now you may go and play if you don't fall out amongst yourselves." The bloodshed was such that the ducks were said to be able to bathe in the blood that flowed down the road. Hence Digbeth Street, Duck Bath Street. Stow has more than its fair share of pubs and hotels, as well as the King's Arms. There is a nod to the town's heritage with the sheep. Then we have the Stag and the Talbot, all in the market square. One pub, however, has got a better claim than most to being the oldest pub in the country, and that is the Porch House. For many years it was called the Royalist, but the current owners changed it back to its original name of the Porch House. It could trace its history as an inn back to 947 AD, which is a very long time ago. Built on the site of a former Saxon church, St Edward's at Stow-on-the-Wold was built in a variety of architectural styles between the 11th and the 15th century. The church's north door is flanked by two ancient yew trees and is rumoured to have sparked Tolkien's inspiration for the doors of Durin on the west gate of Moria in his book The Fellowship of the Ring. And so now we're going to go north, just about 10 miles, to the market town of Chipping Campden, another wool town, which seems to have remained virtually unchanged since the 17th century. The Industrial Revolution was something of a disaster for the Cotswolds. As the cotton mills of the north flourished, so the wool trade in the Cotswolds fell into a very deep depression for many years. There was little economic growth, and this is one of the reasons that so many of the villages have retained a 17th century appearance. The 15th century Church of St James is another splendid example of a medieval wool church, and it contains some of the very few remaining examples of medieval church vestments, most of the others having been destroyed during the Reformation or the dissolution of the monasteries. The church also contains this magnificent memorial to Sir Baptist Hicks. He was a wealthy merchant and philanthropist who made some of his fortune by lending money to the king of the time, King James I. He built and provided almshouses for local pensioners, and he also provided the stunning Market Hall, which still stands today in the middle of the marketplace, looking much as it must have done when it was first built in 1627. He then built a magnificent mansion just beside St James's Church. However, during the Civil War, most of the buildings were destroyed, leaving only the gatehouse and a banqueting hall. The nearby stables were converted into a house for the use of Lady Juliana, Baptist's daughter, and her family. The B over this doorway signifies the home of C.R. Ashby, of whom we will hear more later. This is Dover Hill, named after a particular Robert Dover, who in 1612 instituted what he called the Cotswold Olympic Games. The unusual events comprise such things as shin kicking, which looks pretty dangerous, and cheese rolling, which looks even more dangerous. The Cotswolds held a great attraction for 19th century artists as they harked back to a time before the Industrial Revolution, when man was more physically attached to the work that he produced. In 1871, the designer William Morris and his friend the artist Dante Gabriel Rossetti rented between them Kelmscott Manor in the Oxfordshire Cotswolds. Morris also rented out part of Broadway Tower one summer as a holiday home. The economic depression in the Cotswolds meant that workshops and cottages were readily available and very cheap. This, along with the beauty of the area, made it a very attractive proposition for artists and artisans to come and work here. So many arts and crafts practitioners left London and came to live in the Cotswolds. In 1902, C.R. Ashby and his Guild of Handicraft brought over 50 craftsmen and their families from London's East End to come and live in Chipping Campden. They set up workshops in the old silk mill. And although it initially flourished, in 5 or 6 years, many of the workers had returned to London. Not all of them, though. George Hart, the silversmith, stayed on, and his great-grandson is still running the family business in the old silk mill today. The arts and crafts influence is still very much alive, as can be seen by the many studios and workshops which still abound in Chipping and in many of the other little towns around the Cotswolds. And to end on a lighter, or maybe I should say heavier note, there is a hotel near Chipping Campden which has for the last 25 years been running what's called the Pudding Club, where you get a certain light meal followed by as many traditional English puddings as you can possibly manage to eat in one sitting. There is no limit on how many you can have. It's an unusual way of having a meal, but if you've got a sweet tooth, it's a must. I hope this film has whetted your appetite and made you want to learn a little more about the Cotswolds and maybe come and visit it someday. Thank you very much. Bye bye for now.